Story 1. At night, the library grew quiet in a way that made the walls feel like they were listening. Outside, the wind would sometimes slide across the windows in long, lazy strokes, almost like a lullaby brushing the glass. The parking lot lights flickered now and then, but never fully went out, casting a faint golden glow across the floor just inside the entrance. It reminded me of candlelight. I worked the night shift alone, tucked away behind the desk in the far end of the archive wing. That part of the building was rarely visited during the day, and after 10, no one ever came through at all. The other employees locked up the front half, turned off the overhead lights, and left me to my own devices. I didn't mind the solitude. It felt like I was floating in a forgotten part of the world, surrounded by paper and time and the soft hum of things being preserved. My only tasks were to monitor the climate levels for the older collections, walk the perimeter once every 2 hours, and log any unusual activity. Most nights, that just meant jotting down that nothing had changed, and occasionally resetting the thermostat. The archive wing had its own scent, a mix of dried glue, old pages, and something fainter beneath that I could never quite place. It wasn't unpleasant. It was the kind of smell that made you feel small, like stepping into a room where nothing has moved in 100 years. The lights in that part of the library were lower by design. Warm, amber bulbs set into deep fixtures, so nothing was too bright, nothing too sharp. It made everything feel calm. There were rows of tall shelves, many with ladders on wheels, and narrow aisles that grew colder the farther back you walked. In the very rear was a glass-walled reading room with 2 chairs and a heavy wooden table. People used to study there years ago, but now it mostly stayed empty. On my 3rd week, I noticed something odd. It was nearly 2 a.m., and I had just finished checking the climate monitors when I walked past the glass reading room and saw the lamp inside glowing faintly. I paused in the hallway. The lamp was one of those old green-shaded banker's lamps with a pull chain. I'd never turned it on. No one had. At first I thought I must have bumped the switch earlier by mistake. I stepped inside the room, reached down, and gently pulled the chain. The bulb clicked off with a soft pop. I stood there for a moment listening, but there was nothing. Just the quiet sound of the building settling into itself. The rest of the night passed without incident, though I kept glancing toward the glass room. The lamp stayed off. The next night it happened again. I didn't notice it at first, but when I returned from my second walkthrough around 3, the reading room was softly lit once more. The lamp glowed steadily, casting gentle shadows along the walls. This time I was certain I hadn't touched it. I entered slowly, pulled the chain again, and stood very still. There was no sound, no movement, just the faint crackle of the bulb cooling after it clicked off. I checked the light switch on the wall, but it didn't control the lamp. That lamp had to be turned on manually. I made a note of it in the logbook. Reading room lamp was on again. Unknown cause. The 3rd night, I found the chair had been pulled out slightly from the table. Not by much, just enough that you'd notice if you'd seen it the day before. And on the table there was a book. It wasn't part of the archive collection. No catalog number, no barcode. The cover was worn smooth, the pages yellow at the edges. It had no title. I didn't remember placing it there. I hadn't seen it anywhere in the archives. I picked it up gently, cradling the spine so it wouldn't crack. The pages inside were filled with handwritten notes, soft pencil lines in tight cursive. Most of it looked like someone copying journal entries or maybe interviews. Each page had a date at the top. Some went back to the 1940s. Some didn't have any date at all. I turned a few pages and stopped. One of the entries had my name. There was no context, no mention of the library, just my name in the margin, as if it were part of a list. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed the book and returned it to the table, exactly as I found it. I tucked the chair in again. I walked back to the front desk. I didn't log that part. I just sat there in the amber glow of the reading lights, listening to the hum of the vent, waiting for the night to end. The night after I found the book, I walked slower than usual. Each step down the archive hallway felt like it took a little longer than it had the night before. Not because I was tired, but because something in the air had shifted. The scent I could never quite name had grown just a little stronger. Not bad, just deeper, like rain-soaked wood that had been left too long in the quiet. I passed the microfilm cabinets, past the genealogy drawers. The glass reading room came into view. The lamp was already on. Soft green light, barely reaching the corners. The chair was pulled back again, and the book was still there. I stepped inside, careful not to let my keys jingle against my belt. I didn't want to disturb whatever was already there. I reached out and turned the pages slowly. The pencil handwriting was faint, as if it had been written by a soft hand that didn't want to press too hard. The entry with my name was gone, or maybe I had imagined it. Instead, the page I stopped on held a different list. No dates, no title, just 4 names written in a neat column, all in the same delicate script. I didn't recognize any of them. At the bottom of the page, a 5th name had started to form. Only 2 letters were written. They matched the first 2 letters of mine. I stood there for a while, not touching anything. Then I left the book open, right where it was, turned off the lamp, closed the door gently behind me. Back at the desk, the lights hummed quietly. The computers hadn't gone to sleep. The temperature monitor blinked steady green. Everything said the building was normal, still, safe, empty. But I kept glancing toward the hallway, not afraid, just aware. It was like the library had woken up. Not fully, not suddenly, just enough to let me know I wasn't the only one paying attention. The rest of the shift passed in a kind of hush. Not the usual silence, but something thicker, like the pause between heartbeats. I left at sunrise. The sky was pale and cool. Birds were beginning to rustle in the trees. As I reached for my car door, I turned back to look at the building. It stood still, surrounded by early morning fog. In the far upper window, just behind the glass of the mezzanine, I saw a figure standing very still, not moving, not waving, just there, watching. The lights in that part of the library had never worked. I came back the next night. I don't know why. The chair in the glass room was tucked in neatly. The lamp was off. The book was gone. But on the desk where I sat every night, there was a note. It wasn't signed. There was no handwriting on the front. Inside, in the same tight pencil script I'd seen in the book, were 3 words. Thank you. Stay. I didn't tell anyone. The logbook entry I wrote simply said, "No changes tonight." But from that point forward, I began speaking softly aloud while I worked, as if reading to someone just outside my view. It helped the hours pass, and sometimes when I paused, I could feel the quiet settle around me like a blanket. Not heavy, not cold, just present, like something old and kind was listening, and somehow that made the night feel less long. Story 2. The gas station was old enough that the pumps didn't beep when you pulled the nozzle out. They clicked softly. That was it. It sat off the highway about 20 minutes from town, surrounded on all sides by low trees and fields that stretched out far enough to forget. There were no neighbors, no sidewalks, just gravel and the faint sound of wind through brush. I worked the night shift, 10 to 6, and most nights no one came by after 2. It was the kind of quiet that wasn't just silence. It was stillness, like the world had gone to sleep and forgotten to wake back up. Inside the station, the light above the counter was dim and warm, the kind that made everything feel just a little slower. The hum of the cooler in the back was the only real sound. Sometimes I'd hear a raccoon knock over the trash bins outside, but that was about it. I liked it that way. I could read. I could think. Until the 3rd Friday I worked there. That's when I first saw him. It was a little after 1:30. The air outside was cold enough that my breath fogged against the glass when I leaned forward to look out. He was standing by pump 4. No car, no bag, just standing there. His coat looked too thin for the temperature. He had his hands in his pockets, didn't move, didn't look at anything, just stared out into the dark, like he was waiting for something to come out of the woods. I thought maybe he'd walked from the road, maybe a broken down car I hadn't noticed. I opened the door a little and called out, "Hey, you all right out there?" He didn't turn, didn't speak, just stood there with his back to me. After a minute or 2, I closed the door again and watched from inside. Eventually, he walked off. Not toward the road, not anywhere really, just slowly into the trees beside the station, until the dark swallowed him whole. I didn't see where he went. The next night, I thought maybe it had been a dream, a trick of the light, something strange my mind made up to fill the quiet. But at nearly the same time, there he was again. Same coat, same stillness, no car. This time he stood a little closer, near the trash bins by the ice machine. The outdoor light flickered just above him, casting a soft halo that didn't quite reach his face. I didn't go outside. I just watched. After about 15 minutes, he stepped back into the dark and was gone again. No footsteps, no sound, just that quiet drift into nothing. He didn't come every night, just now and then, always late, always silent, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. Once, I saw him right at the edge of the window glass, reflected behind me. When I turned, No one was there. But a minute later, the bell above the door chimed, soft and slow, as if someone had stepped inside. No one was there either. I stood still for a long time after that. The wind had picked up. I could hear it brushing the edges of the building like fingertips on brick. The lights in the ceiling hummed a little louder than usual. I turned up the heater behind the counter. It didn't help much. I started keeping a notebook behind the counter. Not an official log, just something for myself. Whenever he appeared, I wrote down the time, the weather, what he was wearing, how long he stayed. It didn't make me feel safer, but it made the whole thing feel real. The manager never saw him. The morning crew never saw him either. I stopped mentioning it. Every few nights, the same shape would drift into view, not always at the pumps, sometimes by the far edge of the lot, once near the dumpsters out back. Never moving much, never saying anything, just being there. The security cameras were too old to help. They recorded to tape, and the footage was always too grainy to make out details. Just a blur in the corner of the screen. A shape that might have been a shadow, might have been more. Sometimes I wondered if he could see me, really see me, not just the movement behind the window glass, but me. Some nights, I stayed behind the counter the whole shift, wrapped in a blanket with the radio low. The kind of music that doesn't have lyrics, just soft piano or old strings. That helped, a little. But there was one night I still dream about. I had gone out back to take out the trash. The dumpsters were heavy with rainwater, lids hanging open just enough to let the cold in. The light above the rear door flickered once, then steadied. And then I felt it, that stillness, not silence, stillness, like the air had stopped moving. I turned around, and there he was, closer than ever, standing near the edge of the woods, not behind the trees, not hiding, just watching. His hands were still in his pockets. His face pale in the dim light, but not clear, not blurry either, just not finished, like the image of someone you've seen before, but your mind can't quite place. Not scary, not angry, just unfinished. I dropped the bag beside the dumpster, took a step back. He didn't move. Then, as I turned to head inside, he tilted his head, just slightly, like he was listening. I opened the door, closed it behind me, and locked it for the first time in months. The lights inside felt warmer than usual. The heater clicked on. The hum of the cooler steadied my hands. When I looked again, he was gone. I didn't see him for a week after that, and when he came back, he didn't stay outside. I was in the back organizing the chip racks when the bell over the front door rang once. Not the soft chime it usually made. This time it sounded tired, like the weight of the air had changed. I stepped out from behind the aisle. No one at the counter. No car in the lot, just one pump nozzle swinging gently on its hinge. I walked to the register, checked the security tape. The door had opened, no one visible. The door had closed again, but the air was still cold, colder than it should have been. Behind the counter, on the edge of the logbook, was a small smear of dirt, like a thumbprint, pressed gently, then left to dry. No one else worked that night. No deliveries, no customers. Only the man in the lot. He doesn't show up much anymore. Maybe once every few weeks, maybe less. But I still work the shift. I still check the pump lights, still listen for the chime of the door. And every now and then, when the air goes still again, I whisper goodnight, just in case he's listening. Story 3. The sleep clinic didn't feel like a hospital. It was quieter, dimmer, built for calm. The kind of place where voices stayed low without anyone telling them to. Where the vents blew warm air that smelled faintly like linen and lemon. Each patient had their own room, soft beds, low lighting, soundproofed walls. I worked nights as the observation tech. 3rd floor, 2 wings, 12 patients total at full capacity. Most nights we only had 4 or 5. I sat at the main console behind a glass divider and watched monitors. Each screen showed a black and white feed of a sleeping room, breathing patterns, eye movements, heart rates. Most shifts were slow, soothing in a way. The rhythm of sleep is gentle when it isn't your own. The building was old but clean, tiled halls and beige walls that caught the evening light through tall, narrow windows. There were no clocks in the rooms, no buzzing phones, everything designed to feel timeless. The 3rd floor had one long hallway, with the observation station at the center. From there, I could see both wings at once. The first strange thing I noticed was a flicker on the monitors. Not static, not failure, just a brief skip like a single frame had been lifted out and replaced. It happened in room 307. The patient was still sleeping, vitals unchanged. But for just a moment, the blanket on their chest had looked folded differently. I rewound the footage, played it again. In one frame, the blanket was smooth. In the next, there was a single crease across the center. By the time I looked again, it was gone. I made a note in the log, probably a glitch. The next night it happened again. Different room, room 311. Another flicker. This time the pillow seemed to shift, just slightly, as if someone had lifted the corner, then put it back. But the patient hadn't moved. Not before, not after. The hallway lights stayed dim after midnight. Not off, just lower. Enough to guide you if you had to walk, but not enough to chase away the feeling of being alone. I stepped into the left wing around 2:10 a.m., did a quiet walk, checked on each door, listened. Room 309 had the sound of soft breathing coming from behind the glass. Normal, steady. Room 308 was empty that night. Room 307 was still, just as the camera had shown. But when I turned to walk back, I heard something behind me. Not loud, just a quiet click, like a tongue pressed to the roof of the mouth, then released. I turned around. The hall was empty. No open doors, no footsteps. The sound hadn't echoed. It had been close, somewhere just behind my left shoulder. I stood still for a moment, felt the heat of the hallway settle on the back of my neck. Then I walked calmly back to the station. The monitors looked unchanged. I leaned back and waited for the minutes to pass, but they didn't. The digital clock above the observation console had stopped. 2:14 a.m. Frozen. I looked down at the computer display. It still ticked forward, and the hallway lights dimmed further. I didn't know they could do that. Felt like the building had pulled something in, like it had drawn its breath and was waiting to exhale. I stayed at the console longer than usual that night. Didn't touch the keyboard, didn't adjust the monitors, just watched. Each patient was still asleep. Their chests rose and fell in quiet rhythm. No sudden movement, no strange activity. But the camera in room 310 had gone a little dark. Not black, not off, just dimmer than before, as if something was casting a shadow on the lens. I checked the vitals. Heart rate normal, breathing slow and even. I reached for the microphone used to speak to the rooms just in case. But before I pressed the button, the screen returned to normal. No delay, no warning, just light again, soft across the walls. The hallway outside remained still. No doors opened, no lights flickered. But I felt that pressure again. Not fear, just that strange sense of being watched by something that didn't need to blink. I got up again, walked the east wing slowly. Room 311. A faint knocking sound came from inside. Not fast, not panicked. Just a single tap, then a pause, then another. I unlocked the door gently. Inside, the patients slept deeply, their arms folded under the blanket. The source of the tapping was the wall, the far wall, opposite the bed. No plumbing ran behind it, no equipment mounted there. The sound came once more, a slow knock, followed by silence. I closed the door carefully, didn't make a note in the log, didn't mention it on the report. By the time I got back to the console, the clock on the wall had started ticking again. 2:42. I leaned forward and rested my arms on the desk, letting my breath settle. The monitors kept glowing. I tried to hum to myself, an old lullaby I couldn't fully remember, but the tune came out hollow. Then I noticed something new. Room 308, which had been empty the whole night, now had a shape in the bed. The blanket was pulled tight across a figure, too still. No head visible, just a smooth shape, like something had curled up beneath the fabric and gone completely still. I blinked, rewound the feed. A few minutes before, the bed had been empty. No one had entered, no sound in the hall, no door opening or closing. I stood slowly, walked down the hallway, each step light, quiet, measured. The door to room 308 was closed, locked like it should be. I pressed my ear to it. Nothing. No breathing. No movement. I unlocked it with the softest click I could manage. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made. No indent. No warmth. But the blanket was folded differently than it had been earlier. I returned to the station without a word, sat in my chair, folded my hands, watched the screens. They all looked normal again, even room 308. The morning tech arrived at 6 sharp, She asked how the night had gone. I said it was quiet and handed her the log. As I stepped into the elevator, I looked down the hallway one last time. The lights flickered, just once, but in the glass of the reading room, I saw a reflection that didn't match. Someone standing beside my chair. Not me, not her. The elevator doors closed gently, and I went home. Story 4. The warehouse was quiet after 10. That was when the last forklift shut down, when the doors were all locked, when the building stopped humming and the stillness set in. It was a fulfillment center, one of those overnight operations where orders came in around the clock, but only a handful of people worked the night shift. I was one of them. Mostly I ran inventory reports, restocked aisles, picked a few overnight orders. Nothing difficult, just long hours. The lights overhead stayed on low. Rows and rows of soft, white tubes that barely hummed. Everything bathed in a pale glow that made time feel slow and distant. There were over 30 aisles in total, each stretching back farther than you'd expect. Tall metal racks, heavy boxes, clear paths painted on the floor. It was easy to feel alone there, even with one or two other workers on the opposite side of the building. It always felt like I was the last one left. Some people brought earbuds. I didn't. I liked the quiet, liked hearing my own footsteps, liked the way sound changed the deeper you walked into the shelves. But after my third week, I started noticing something strange about aisle 9. It wasn't anything loud, not at first, just a feeling. I'd walk past it, maybe on the way to aisle 13, and the lights in 9 would feel a little dimmer, like something had passed beneath them just before I arrived. Sometimes the air there felt colder, not by much, just enough to make my arm hairs rise. The first time I mentioned it, the floor manager shrugged, said the HVAC vents weren't balanced properly. Some aisles stayed colder than others. It made sense, so I moved on, until I started hearing the cart. It had a specific sound, one of the old metal pick carts with the uneven front wheel that always squeaked when you turned it. I usually left that one near the back wall. No one used it. But around 3 a.m., I'd hear that squeak again. Not constant, just a few turns. Then nothing. I checked the cameras. Nothing unusual. Aisle 9 always looked empty. Still, the sound came again 2 nights later. This time a little closer, just a few aisles down. Squeak. Pause. Another squeak. Like someone moving slow, careful. I walked the floor, checked every aisle, every cart. Didn't find anything out of place. Didn't hear the sound again. But when I turned to head back to the main desk, I saw something on the floor. A single shipping label. No box nearby, just the label. The item number was for a winter coat we hadn't stocked in months. I remembered because it had been part of a holiday special, sold out weeks ago. I picked it up, set it on the desk, tried not to think about it. But later that same night, I had to pull an order from aisle 9. It was just a set of headphones, nothing special. Row C mid-shelf. As I stepped into the aisle, the lights above me flickered, only for a second, and the air changed. It wasn't just cold anymore. It smelled different, like dust and wet cardboard, like something left too long in the dark. I didn't stop. I kept walking, tried to ignore the sound of something brushing faintly against the next row of shelves, tried to ignore the soft click of plastic wheels on the concrete floor behind me. I picked the item quickly, scanned the tag, turned to leave, and halfway down the aisle, I noticed one of the boxes on the floor had been opened. Not torn, not dropped, just opened, carefully, neatly. The packing tape had been peeled back in a clean line, folded gently at the edge. Inside was nothing. The box was empty. I closed the box without thinking, pressed the flaps down, folded the tape back into place as best I could. Then I walked away. Didn't run, didn't rush, just walked like I was tired, like it was nothing, like I didn't feel the weight of unseen eyes drifting behind me down the aisle. The lights flickered once more as I stepped back into the main walkway. After that night, I avoided aisle 9 whenever I could. Sometimes I rerouted pick pads, took longer ways around, shifted small things just to keep from going near it. No one noticed, and no one else said anything. Then one night there was a new overnight guy. Name was Jeremy, fresh out of high school, wide-eyed and eager to work. He asked if there were any weird parts of the warehouse. I said no, told him the place was boring, that he'd be lucky to stay awake. Later that night, I heard the squeak again. It was louder this time, faster. Not the slow, cautious pacing I'd heard before. This time, it sounded like someone running with the cart. I stepped out from the break room, looked toward aisle 9. It was empty, but the cart was sitting right in the middle of the opening, angled like it had been pushed fast and then let go. And inside it, not boxes, not tags, just one coat, still wrapped in clear plastic. The same coat from the label I'd found earlier. I picked it up gently. The tag was the same item number, but the packaging date said it was scanned 3 days ago. By me. I hadn't touched a coat in weeks. Jeremy didn't say much the rest of the night. He kept glancing toward the aisle. I could tell he'd heard it too. When his shift ended, he clocked out and didn't come back. No message, no call, just gone. I didn't blame him. I kept working. Weeks passed. The routine stayed the same. Every now and then, the cart would turn up in a strange spot, in a locked aisle, or near the back office where it shouldn't fit. Once, I found it beside my car, at the edge of the gravel lot. Empty, wheels muddy. I wheeled it back in without a word. But I started to notice something else. Boxes were going missing. Small ones, single units, always picked clean, tape peeled back exactly the same way. And only ever from aisle 9. I started keeping a personal log, not official, just notes in my phone. Over time, the list grew. All the missing boxes were from the same section. Winter clothing, heavy layers, insulated gloves. Every item you'd need if you were walking somewhere cold, somewhere long, somewhere far from here. Last night I found a note on the cart, written in black marker on the cardboard backing. not fresh, faded at the edges like it had been there a while. It only had 2 words: keep walking. I left it alone, put the cart back, turned off the lights for that wing, and went home early for the first time. I don't know what moves through aisle 9. I don't know why it's collecting, but I know it's still there, careful, quiet, always just beyond the last row, waiting for someone else to follow. Story 5. The underground garage was always cooler than it should have been. Even in the summer, the air stayed heavy and damp. Concrete and steel don't hold warmth the same way a building does. They stay cold, no matter how long the sun's been up. I worked nights at the lot beneath the Westlake Medical Pavilion. My little booth was tucked just to the left of the B3 entrance ramp. Glass windows, metal chair, soft hum of a small space heater I kept under the desk. The garage had 4 levels. B1 and B2 were for staff. B4 was under renovation. B3 was the patient overflow. That's where I stayed. Most nights, nothing happened. I checked the logs, processed the entry tickets, sometimes walked the perimeter with a flashlight if I was feeling restless. It was the kind of quiet that clung to your sleeves, a sleepy kind of quiet, the kind you could almost get used to, until I started seeing the sedan. It was a silver car, mid-size, unremarkable, the kind of car that disappears into a crowd. But I started noticing it parked in different spaces each night, not moving, not coming or going, just appearing. I checked the logs. The plate wasn't scanned on entry. There was no ticket, no camera footage showing it drive in. But there it was, perfectly parked, right between the faded white lines. The first few times I assumed it was a system error. Maybe the driver came in just before my shift started. Maybe someone had overridden the logs. I made a note, then forgot about it. But the next week it happened again. Different spot, same car. I checked the footage again, scrolled frame by frame. No movement, no arrival. The lights above that section of the garage had flickered just once, and then the car was there, like it had always been. I went to check it in person. The car was clean, windows dark, tires free of dust. I looked inside with a small flashlight. The cabin was empty, driver's seat pulled all the way back. But on the passenger seat, there was a single folder. Medical files, no name on the outside, just a thin red sticker that said, B3 patient review. I tapped the glass, no response. I left it alone, told myself someone would claim it by morning. They didn't. The next night, the silver sedan was gone. No trace, no folder, just an empty parking spot beneath the low yellow light. I checked the logs again. No recorded exit, no license plate scan. I told myself it had been picked up during the day. Someone on staff maybe, someone who didn't clock in the usual way. But that folder, I checked the station bin before I left that morning. It wasn't there. A few nights passed, nothing out of place. The routine was quiet. Then the sedan came back, parked one row closer to my booth. Same make, Same model, same dark windows. No sound when it arrived. No lights, no engine hum. It was just there. I stood outside my booth and watched for a while. The lot was completely still. No doors opening, no movement behind the windshield. I walked slowly toward it, flashlight in hand. This time the folder was on the dashboard, turned toward the glass. No red sticker, just a name, mine, typed neatly on a cover sheet. I didn't touch it, didn't even try the door. I backed away step by step until I was back inside my booth. Then I locked the door, even though I'd never locked it before. I didn't call anyone, didn't write it in the overnight notes. I just waited. By morning, the car was gone again. No exit recorded, no footage, no signs of tires on the concrete. I started noticing things after that. The floor numbers in the stairwell would sometimes flicker, always stopping at 3. A low voice on the intercom would whisper my name, only once, just before the hour turned. And sometimes, in the reflection of the booth glass, I'd see someone walking between the pillars. But when I turned around, the lot was empty. That went on for weeks, never louder, never more, just enough to remind me that I was not alone. Then one night, I came in for my shift, and the booth was already warm. The heater was on. The monitor screens were active. A cup of coffee sat gently steaming beside the keyboard. My name tag was resting on top of a folder. Inside the folder was a chart, dates and times, health logs, medical notes I'd never written. Every page signed at the bottom, my signature. I never remembered writing them. There was a final page loose in the back. Continue monitoring B3. Do not leave before sunrise. The note wasn't typed. It was written in a soft pencil line that curved too gently to feel human. I sat down, sipped the coffee, watched the empty lot through the glass, and I stayed. Story 6. The laundromat sat at the far end of a strip mall that never quite filled up. A donut shop on one side, always closed before sunset. A nail salon that rarely had the lights on, and a few empty storefronts with papered windows and faded for lease signs. I worked the overnight shift. It wasn't a busy place. Just a few regulars who came late to avoid crowds, or drifters who wandered in to stay warm and leave without doing any laundry. My job was simple: clean the lint traps, sweep the floors, watch the cameras, and keep the doors locked after 2. The place was quiet, always warm. The fluorescent lights gave off a low hum that you stopped noticing after the first week. There were 12 dryers, numbered left to right along the back wall. They all looked the same, old but functional. Heavy glass doors with little silver handles and the same yellowed plastic buttons. The 6th dryer from the left, dryer number 6, always made a slightly different sound than the others. A low whir with a kind of rhythmic hitch, like a soft hiccup that repeated every 12 seconds. Nothing sharp, just barely enough to notice. I didn't think much of it until I realized it never stopped. Even when it was empty, even when it had no coins, even when the power panel showed nothing active. Dryer number 6 would keep turning, slow, even, relentless. I mentioned it to the owner. He told me the wiring was old, said not to worry. So I didn't, until one night I heard it open. I was in the supply closet, sorting bleach and detergent, when I heard the soft metallic click of a dryer door unlatching, followed by the faint sound of it swinging open and closing again. I walked out to the floor. The room was empty, all doors shut, except for number 6. It was closed, but the glass was fogged on the inside, like something had been wet. There was no laundry inside, no heat. I checked the panel. No coins used, no time running. Still, the drum kept turning. I pressed the button to stop it, paused for a moment, then started again. Same pace, same soft hiccup every 12 seconds. That was the first night. The next time it happened, there were footprints. I had just mopped the tile. Fresh, damp streaks running toward the back. When I returned from taking out the trash, I saw the prints, bare feet, small and light, as if from someone walking slowly without weight. They led from the middle of the laundromat to dryer number 6 and ended there. No prints back, no prints out. I checked the cameras. The footage showed the door gently swinging open at 3:14 a.m. No one visible, no trigger, the drum still turning. And just before the door opened, for a single frame, there was a blur across the lens. Not a shadow, not a person, just a ripple like heat rising off asphalt. But inside, the night. The next few nights were quiet, normal even. The dryer still turned, always turning, but there were no footprints, no noises, nothing to suggest I hadn't imagined the whole thing. I started to feel silly for thinking it was anything more, just faulty wiring, old equipment. Still, I began avoiding the 6th machine, didn't mop near it, didn't refill the lint basket beside it, didn't make eye contact with the turning drum through the glass. Then, one night around 3:20, a customer came in. That wasn't unusual. We had a few late stragglers. But this one, I didn't hear the door open. I just looked up, and she was there. A woman, maybe mid-40s, wearing a pale blue sweatshirt and soft slippers. Hair long and messy, like she'd just gotten out of bed. She didn't bring any clothes, didn't look at the detergent, didn't ask for change. She walked straight to dryer number 6. She opened the door slowly, knelt down in front of it, and whispered something I couldn't hear. I stood up behind the counter, started to ask if she needed help, but she didn't respond. She just reached into the empty drum with both hands, held them there for a while, still and quiet, then stood up, closed the door, and walked back out. I checked the footage later. The camera showed me sitting at the counter, looking up, but no one appeared, no figure, no motion, just me, looking at nothing, standing, watching, frozen, and dryer number 6, turning. After that, I started dreaming of the laundromat, but in the dreams, all the machines were gone, all except the 6th dryer. It stood in the center of the room, Lights off, drums still turning, and the floor around it was covered in footprints. Some small, some larger, all pointed toward the machine, all ending right at the door. No prints coming back. One night, I stayed after my shift, just to see. I waited until 3:14, stood a few feet from the dryer, watching, and at exactly the minute, the door unlatched, swung open, not fast, not slow, just enough to let the warm air spill out. And for a moment, I swear I saw something inside. Not a person, not clothes, just a shape, folded in on itself, curled where the laundry should be, soft and shifting like fog caught in fabric. Then it vanished. I closed the door, didn't touch the buttons, just walked away. The owner came by the next week, said he was replacing the machine soon. New models, energy efficient. Said dryer number 6 would be gone by Friday. But when the delivery truck arrived, only 11 new dryers had been ordered. They said it was a warehouse mistake, that they'd only processed 11. I asked if they could take the 6th one anyway. The delivery guy looked confused, said he didn't see a 6th dryer on the floor. I turned to point at it, but it wasn't there. Just empty tile, smooth and clean. I stood there for a long time, still listening, and beneath the hum of the overhead lights, I could just barely hear it. The soft turn of a drum, one slow hiccup every 12 seconds. Story 7. The diner always smelled like butter and burnt coffee. Not in a bad way, more like how a favorite blanket still smells like the last night you wore it. I worked the night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 in the morning, 6 nights a week. We rarely had more than 3 customers after midnight. Most were truckers or tired locals who just needed a place to sit. The jukebox only played when someone paid for it, which meant it was silent most nights. The only real sounds were the sizzle of the flat-top grill and the low clink of plates behind the counter. We had a row of booths along the window, 7 in total. The one at the very end had the best view of the parking lot and the road beyond. It was also the one nobody sat in. Not for any reason we ever talked about. It just stayed empty. And when someone did sit there, the other regulars would glance over without turning their heads. The way you watch someone from the corner of your eye. Not afraid, just aware. The first time I saw him, it was just after 2 a.m. He came in quietly, didn't speak, didn't look around, just walked straight to the window booth and sat down. His coat was long and dark, worn around the edges like it had been dragged through one too many winters. He placed a small object on the table, something round. I asked if he wanted coffee. He nodded, didn't lift his eyes. I brought him a fresh cup, left it in front of him. He didn't drink it. He just stared out the window, not at the parking lot, not at the road, at the reflection, like he was watching the room behind him through the glass. He stayed for almost an hour, then got up and left, didn't pay, didn't speak. The cup was still full, completely cold. The object he'd brought with him was gone. The next night he came again. Same time, same booth. Again I brought him coffee. Again he didn't drink. This time he left behind a single coin. Tarnished, old, not American. I showed it to my manager the next morning. She told me not to worry. Said some people just like quiet company. But she didn't take the coin. Said I should keep it. I put it in the tip jar. By the end of the night, it was gone. The man kept coming. Same booth, same stare into the reflection. And every night he left something behind. A button, a scrap of cloth. Once a photo of a house I didn't recognize. Black and white, faded around the edges. The house in the photo was burned. Everything remains warm and slow. Sleepy light, quiet footsteps, and something that keeps showing up when the world is empty. Story 8, Part 2. The man at the window booth continued. I began to notice something else. The booth where he sat, booth 7, never seemed to stay clean. No matter how many times I wiped it down, the table always felt faintly dusty, as if it hadn't been touched in years. Sometimes the window behind it would fog, not from breath, not from temperature, just a faint cloudiness that faded as soon as I noticed. He always arrived at 2:07, not 2:05, not 2:10, exactly 2:07. He never came earlier, never later. I tried to watch the parking lot to see his car, tried to catch him walking up. But no matter how long I stared, he never seemed to arrive. He was just there, already sitting, already waiting. One night I got curious. I asked where he was from. He didn't turn his head, but after a long pause, he said something soft. I had a house. His voice didn't match his face. It was younger, almost too clear, like a radio playing from another room. I asked if it was the house in the photo. He didn't answer, just looked deeper into the glass. The lights behind me flickered, only once, but long enough for his reflection to blur. Long enough that I thought, for just a second, he wasn't alone in the glass. There was a second shape beside him, faint, leaning in close. But when I turned around, we were still alone. I stopped asking questions, but the tokens he left behind started to change. One night it was a watch, still ticking, still warm. The next a baby shoe, wrapped in soft blue ribbon. Then a ring, too small for his hands. The following week he didn't come. 2:07 passed, then 2:30, then sunrise. The booth stayed empty, the window clear. I didn't know why, but it made the diner feel colder, lonelier. Then 3 nights later, he was back, but something was different. He looked older, tired. His hands were folded on the table, the cup of coffee already in front of him, though I hadn't poured it. I stepped out from behind the counter. He didn't move, just stared into the window. And when I looked at the reflection, I saw myself standing right behind him. But I wasn't moving either, just standing there, still as a photo, eyes fixed forward. He stood up slowly, left something on the seat, Then he walked out the door. This time I watched. I made sure. He didn't open the door, didn't touch the handle. He just faded through it. Gone. I went to the booth, looked at the seat. A single note, written in faded ink, on a receipt from our own register. Thank you for remembering me. Booth 7 still sits empty. We don't clean it anymore. No one asks to sit there. But every now and then, right around 2:07, the coffee machine turns on by itself, pours 1 cup, leaves it full and steaming.